Right now, 12.7 million people are waiting to see again. They're not waiting for a cure, they're waiting for a cornea. Their corneas, the clear window at the front of the eye, are scarred, diseased, or destroyed, and the global supply of human donor corneas covers just 1 in every 70 patients who need one. But science just found a way around the waiting list, and it doesn't need a donor at all. Bioengineered corneas, grown in labs, printed from human cells, are now restoring sight to the blind. This is what happens when biology stops waiting and starts building its own spare parts. Hit subscribe because the science of sight just got a whole lot bigger.
The cornea is the most transplanted human tissue in the world and one of the most needed. Sitting at the very front of the eye, it bends incoming light and focuses it onto the retina. Without a healthy cornea, even a perfect eye behind it cannot form a clear image. Corneal disease is the 4th leading cause of blindness worldwide, according to the World Health Organization. Causes range from infections and chemical burns to genetic conditions like keratoconus, where the cornea slowly bulges outward. In developing nations, untreated eye infections alone account for millions of cases of permanent corneal scarring. For most of these patients, a corneal transplant using donated human tissue is the only path back to sight. The procedure has existed since 1905, and for decades it was considered one of surgery's greatest achievements. But the donor system has a ceiling, and the world ran into it a long time ago. Globally, there is only 1 donor cornea available for every 70 patients who need a transplant. In the United States alone, 250,000 corneas are needed every year. Only around 25,000 are donated, a gap that leaves hundreds of thousands without options. The problem is even more severe in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, where eye banking infrastructure barely exists. And even when a donor cornea is available, the body can reject it, sometimes years later. Rejection rates reach 15% in high-risk patients, and long-term graft failure approaches 50% after a decade. For millions of patients, the donor system was simply never going to reach them in time. Scientists have been trying to build an artificial cornea for over a century, and 3 approaches are now leading the field. The first is the Keratoprosthesis, a synthetic optical device made from medical-grade polymer anchored into the existing eye tissue. The Boston KPro, approved by the FDA in 1992, is the most widely implanted artificial cornea in the world. Around 20,000 Boston KPro devices have been implanted globally, reserved for patients where donor transplants have already failed. It achieves a 90% one-year retention rate, giving sight back to patients who had no other options left. But polymer implants carry long-term risks, including glaucoma, membrane growth behind the lens, and gradual corneal tissue breakdown. That is where the second approach comes in, bioengineered tissue designed to work with the body rather than sit inside it. Researchers at LinkoCare University in Sweden developed a collagen implant derived from purified pig skin, a material already used in FDA-approved devices. The implant is inserted directly into the existing corneal tissue, no donor cells, no sutures, no removal of the patient's own cornea. Once in place, the patient's own cells gradually migrate into the implant, integrating it as living tissue. Crucially, because the collagen is cell-free, it triggers no classic immune rejection response from the body. The third frontier is the most ambitious, printing an entirely new cornea from cultured human cells in a laboratory. Precise Bio, based in North Carolina, grew corneal endothelial cells from a single donated cornea in the lab. From that one cornea, they produced approximately 300 printable implants, each engineered to replicate natural optical clarity. 3 distinct technologies, one shared mission: restore sight without waiting for a donor who may never come. In a clinical trial spanning India and Iran, 20 patients with advanced keratoconus received the collagen implant. 14 of them were completely blind before the surgery, with no light perception in the affected eye. The procedure itself took under 30 minutes. A small incision, the implant inserted, no donor tissue required at all. 2 years later, researchers followed up, and the results surprised even the team who built the implant. Every single patient crossed the threshold from blindness or near blindness into measurable, functional vision. 3 patients, all of them previously blind, recovered vision sharp enough to read a standard eye chart perfectly. One of them described putting in contact lenses for the very first time without feeling anything at all. Half a world away, in Haifa, Israel, a second frontier was being tested on a single patient in October. This patient was legally blind in one eye and became the first person ever to receive a fully 3D printed cornea. No donor cornea was transplanted. Every cell in the implant had been grown and printed in a lab. Professor Michael Mimouni, who led the surgical team, called it a defining moment for regenerative ophthalmology. The surgery succeeded, and for the first time, a human eye saw through tissue that had never been a donor's. 2 patients, 2 continents, 2 different technologies, and the same outcome: sight restored where none seemed possible. Across every emerging cornea technology, the same question gets asked first. Does it actually work long-term? We already know the Boston KPro holds a 90% retention rate after 1 year, but time changes everything. By 5 years, that retention rate drops to between 65 and 70%, a meaningful decline. The leading complications include glaucoma in over 40% of patients and membrane growth behind the device in over a quarter. By contrast, the LinkoCare collagen trial reported 0 serious adverse events across all 20 patients followed. The implants are designed to be stored for up to 2 years before use. That shelf life matters enormously. Donor corneas typically must be used within just 2 weeks. In China, a separate trial of human recombinant collagen corneas is now underway across 85 registered patients. Early signals across these trials point in the same direction: engineered corneas performing on par with donor tissue. The global artificial cornea market was valued at roughly $486 million in 2024. It is projected to nearly double, reaching almost $1 billion by 2033, according to industry forecasts. That growth isn't speculative hype. It tracks directly against a patient population that keeps climbing every year. Every data point tells the same story. This is no longer an experimental fringe technology. It is becoming a measurable, scalable answer to one of medicine's oldest unsolved shortages. Here is the most important thing to understand about everything you just learned. None of it replaces donor transplants. For patients who qualify for a standard donor transplant, that procedure remains the gold standard, proven, refined, and reliable. These new technologies exist for a different group entirely: the patients the donor system was never reaching, the ones on 70-person waiting lists, the ones whose bodies reject donor tissue repeatedly, the ones living in regions with no eye banking infrastructure at all, and therefore no access to begin with. For them, bioengineered and synthetic corneas are not a replacement. They are the first real option they have ever had. That distinction matters because the ethical questions here are different from the ones people usually imagine. The biggest concern is not whether the technology works, it's whether the world can manufacture it at scale. Precise Bio's approach, multiplying cells from a single donor into hundreds of implants, points toward real scalability. But scaling a laboratory breakthrough into a global supply chain is a very different challenge than proving it works once. Cost is the next hurdle. These implants must eventually become cheaper than maintaining the existing donor and eye banking system. Researchers in China and India are already working on localized manufacturing built specifically for low-resource healthcare systems. That regional approach could be the difference between a breakthrough and a breakthrough that actually reaches people. There are also long-term unknowns that only time and larger trials can answer with real confidence. The LinkoCare trial followed patients for 2 years. Boston KPro data spans decades, but every new material starts smaller. Researchers still need to confirm how these implants behave at 10, 20, even 30 years after implantation. Doctors describe artificial cornea surgery as a salvage procedure, and patients must consent knowing results aren't guaranteed. Medical ethics guidelines warn against creating unjustified expectations. Every gain in vision here is real, but never guaranteed. The next generation of implants is already being designed to answer some of these questions before they're even asked. Some labs are now developing drug-eluting corneal implants, designed to slowly release medication directly into the eye. That could prevent infections and reduce inflammation automatically without the patient needing daily eye drops. Other teams are exploring implants embedded with light-sensitive materials, a tentative early step toward treating retinal conditions too. None of that is confirmed science yet, but it shows where this field is heading next. What makes this moment significant isn't one single device, it's the shift in how medicine approaches scarcity itself. For most of medical history, repairing the body meant relying entirely on what one human could give to another. Bioengineering breaks that constraint, turning a single act of generosity into hundreds of restored futures. It won't end the need for donors, but it will finally close the gap between them. And for the millions still waiting in silence and darkness, that gap closing is the only headline that matters.
The window that went dark for millions is finally starting to open again. Not because we found more donors, but because we finally learned to build what nature once required. 12.7 million people are still waiting, but for the first time, the gap is closing. That is what science looks like when it finally answers a problem patiently. Hit like, share this with someone, and subscribe to SynthCosmos. We cover the science reshaping our world as we know it every single week. We'll see you in the next one.